Welcome to the Happy Disruptors podcast. If you're a creative thinker with an unconventional approach to your industry, you just might be a happy disruptor. Join your friends at the Great Outdoors Foundation for honest conversations about tackling critical issues like conservation with an uncritical disposition. If you like to smile and get things done, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the Happy Disruptors podcast. I'm Hannah Inman, but before we jump in today, I just want to give a very special shout out and thank you to our partners at Scheels for sponsoring today's episode. Scheels has been a longtime supporter of the Great Outdoors Foundation, and we're so grateful to have them as sponsors as the podcast as well. Thank you, Scheels. So I'm so excited about today's episode. I think that the co-op system is such a huge part of farming and conservation. And today we have with us Bobby Martins. Bobby, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Bobby Martins with the Iowa Institute for Cooperatives. I'm the executive director there.
So to begin, and we have a wide swath of people that watch this, people that are intimately involved in agriculture or conservation, and those that, have started to become interested in some of our issues. So can you give our listeners a brief history of the co-op system, particularly as it relates to Iowa?
Yeah, when you think about the cooperative system and what the cooperative system does for all of Iowa and all of rural America, but especially the farm gate in Iowa, it's a really, really intricate part of the farm gate and has been for 140 years probably. The cooperative system is really unique because in the cooperative system, the customers are also the member owners. So the members, the farmers in this case, would own the cooperative system, which means they control the cooperative system, but it also means that any profits made in the cooperative system are either used to buy assets, grain systems, fertilizer sheds, all those sorts of things for the farmer members, or those profits go right back to the farmer members, which is, just take a second to think about that. That means that in the cooperative system, we don't have a Wall Street investor that's making money off of that space, right? Or we don't have leakage to individual owners that are buying Florida homes or whatever that looks like in that space, right? That money is staying right there, and it's been made a huge, huge difference for the farm gate space across the United States.
And your organization doesn't just deal with the agricultural co-ops, you deal with all sorts of others. So what are some other examples?
That's correct. So RECs, the Rural Electric Cooperatives in the state of Iowa, are really, really important to the state. Their service territories and what they do to make sure, especially the rural parts of Iowa, have usable, good electricity. Reliable, good electricity is really important. But also we have communications cooperatives across the state, and credit unions they're called credit unions, but they're essentially cooperatives. They're set up as cooperatives because they're owned by the members, and the members get the benefits of what happens with the credit union space.
That's great. So with this business model, how is there an advantage to like the individual farmer? You talked a little bit about, keeping those profits, but just explain a little bit more about what that advantage is.
Yeah, so with the cooperative system, first of all, the farmers are members, and if they have production at risk, meaning they have something that they're raising that could potentially not live, right? That could die, right? So whether that's livestock or whether that's corn or whether that's beans or whatever that looks like, they're a member of the cooperative, and they can vote on what happens for the board of directors and what happens within the cooperative. Now, what that practically has meant for Iowa for the last 30, 40 years is that farm gate space has been incredibly, incredibly competitive. So our cooperatives have invested in infrastructure, they've invested in technologies that have kept that space very, very competitive in a way that if it was private companies investing in that or publicly trading companies investing in that, we would not have the asset base that we have. But because the cooperatives are owned by the members are investing in asset infrastructure that makes the cooperative successful, but also helps them be successful as farmer members.
So would you say that most co-ops within the farm gate system are mainly row crop?
When you look at Iowa, right? So when you think about what our 40 grain and farm supply cooperatives do in this space, so we have 40 cooperatives in Iowa that do grain and farm supply. So that'd be grain, agronomy, maybe energy. Some have a lumber yard. Some have some energy business where they might have a C-store, something like that. the primary areas of those 40 would be grain systems and agronomy. And it'd be split pretty evenly across the state, different with different cooperatives because they have a different focus, but very evenly. I estimate that just over 70% of the acres planted in Iowa touch a cooperative in some way. So that's a pretty massive space when you think about the farm gate space, about how close cooperatives become. And that might not be touching every acre with 100% cooperative business, but it's touching every acre, all 70% of the acres in some way, shape, or form.
So when you start to talk, and we've had these conversations as well, but when you start to talk about regenerative ag,
right,
how does the co-op system either provide assistance, maybe somewhat of a barrier, and there could be opportunity in the future? Can you just explain how that works together?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting space for the cooperative model. First of all, the cooperatives that are out there, our grain and farm supply cooperatives, have a level of trust with the farmer members that's very high because the farmer members own them, right? The farmers members can invest, are the owners, are the investors in them, and they can control what the business does. So I think because there is so much trust in that space, the cooperatives are in a unique position to be a trusted advisor to the farmers. And that's very local. 11 of our 40 grain and farm supply co-ops in the state are single location still. And the Main Street single location cooperative, which is kind of pretty unique and pretty special in that way to be able to have that really local knowledge. And even our largest cooperatives in the state, they are much larger than a single location. Right. But at the same time, they're still very local, right? They're local to the state. They're local to a geography. They have local board members who are farmers in those areas that are representing and making decisions about where that cooperative goes. So I think that is one space that becomes really important. And if I may, Hannah, I'll give you two examples of cooperatives that I think are doing some cool things in this space. One is Heartland Cooperative. So Heartland Cooperative, I know you have worked with them some in the past, and they have conservation agronomists on staff. They have teams that work in this space. And from the board president through the CEO and down through that organization, they believe in and support the space that we are talking about, regenerative ag, environmental wherewithal, and being smart about environmental decisions, and all of those sorts of things. Another one, though, is Gold Eagle Cooperative, right? Another one that I think is just a great example from the board president on through their CEO and through the entire organization, really working to think about how they help their members think about conservation agronomy and think about the entire space that they're in and this whole watershed that we are in as well. So, but it doesn't end there. Those are two examples. They're easy to pick out, but I could go around the state and find examples all over in all of the state to be able to share with you.
Yeah, we've had Heartland. Well, we've had Ruth from Heartland on the podcast before, and it's an interesting business model. So how we work is they have embedded conservation agronomists. We help fund some of their projects that they do. And in addition, we have a sustainability linked loan so that if the farmers of that co-op reach certain metrics, cover crops, edge of field practices, nutrient management, then they receive basis points off of their operational loan, which is an interesting model. How does, and we've had this conversation, I'm going to get real deep, this is going to be out of left field, but how does that middle infrastructure influence conservation? Because I think a lot of the programs have been focused on the farmer, right? But to really go to that next level and make conservation part of the bottom line of farming and the industry, I think you have to address that middle management. What do you think about that sort of theory of change?
Yeah, I think it's my background. I spent 19 years at Iowa State University in the area of supply chain management, particularly in this ag space, right? I think it's really important to take a step back and to be able to think about this space and to be able to think about the actors within this supply chain, because you have a lot of concentration when you move up the supply chains.
Right.
You know, we talk about the ABCs, you know,
Yeah.
so, and then you have a lot of concentration also when you move back the other direction in the supply chain, because you think about the fertilizer suppliers and, you know, some of the seed companies in that space, a lot of concentration. Then you have this farmer space where even though our farms have grown a lot, they are not concentrated at all compared to the supply chain around them. Even the largest farmers, if you'd put them together, there's basically no concentration there relative to those. So that makes the farm gate space very, very interesting, because our cooperatives are the space that are the players between these larger concentrated sectors of the supply chain, right, in the farms themselves. Well, where do the farms create trust, and how do they think about their decision-making abilities? I think that's exactly where the cooperative space comes in, because the cooperative space is close enough to know what those farmers are thinking, doing. They're the ones that are oftentimes applying crop protection. They're the ones that are oftentimes applying fertilizer. They're very close to that space. They're the ones that are billing farmers for their agronomic practices that they're doing, right? And what they're putting on. So I think that not only does it make them in a unique place to know and understand it, but it makes them be unique advisors to the farmers. So I think that just that level of knowledge and understanding means that the farmer can trust what's going on there a lot more. So I think because of that entire space, when we think about what our cooperatives in this state are doing in that space, I think that that is an absolute natural link to the farm. And, you know, the cooperatives are only an extension of the farms themselves. Right. So there's a knowledge transfer there that I think can be very unique across many acres in the state.
Are there barriers for leveraging the co-op system for more regen, ag, or conservation measures?
You know, are there barriers? I mean, there's challenges, right? I don't know that I would say, in my opinion, that there's barriers, because anything can become can be overcome, right? So we can move through anything. I think the space as a whole, though, there are certainly challenges that are associated, because in any system like this, there's so many trade-offs that need to be made by the farmer member. And I think a big piece is understanding those true trade-offs, thinking about some of the costs associated with those, but also considering the externalities associated with it, and then using the best, bang for our buck, if you will, or the best societal return, if you will, or the best farmer member return. All of those functions for the farmer could look different.
Yeah.
But I think it's managing through those trade-offs. So are there challenges to be able to say, hey, my trade-off is the same as someone else's trade-off that's not on my farm? 100%. There are challenges associated with that, and the cooperative is very close to the farmer member. Can those trade-offs be thought through and understood, though? I believe that is a space that our co-ops can be part of, that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, I think that the co-op model is it's so integral to who the farmer is, to who we are as a society in Iowa. And I think that this is maybe one of the most underutilized leverage points or tools. And I think understanding that is really important. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. As we look at, the pressures on farms, the pressures on farmers over the last 5 years, do you see a change in business practices or business models for the co-ops that help them transition the next couple of years?
Yeah, that the space has been tougher the last few years.
Yeah.
The farm economy has been tougher. When the farm economy is tougher, the conditions that the co-op operates in are tougher, and usually financial performance is not as good at the co-op level either, right? That said, our Iowa co-ops are incredibly healthy, right?
Yeah.
Which means our balance sheets are healthy. We are running good, solid businesses that can be here for the long term. There's always going to be some pressures in the space for mergers, acquisitions, and continuing to grow, just like almost any industry you would see around would have those same kind of pressures. So we will continue to see those. Now, the question is can those pressures be brought through the system so that more good is added, or does that take away something from the system? And I think that our co-ops are in a position that even if we do see some more consolidation, which we likely will over the next few years, they're still going to be the closest farm gate businesses to our cooperatives. So again, I kind of said it before, but I'll say it again. Even the largest cooperatives in the state are not large compared to the multinationals around them.
Right.
These are not huge businesses, right? So as they continue to consolidate some, if they can actually bring more services closer to those farmers, maybe it's adding more conservation agronomists, right? Maybe it's having whole departments in that space, right? Maybe it is one of the things that I would love to see in the future is our local cooperatives, ag and grain and farm supply cooperatives, being able to work closer with federal programs.
Yes.
To be able to bring those federal programs that exist for societal changes that we want and see and are necessary for us to be able to make happen much closer to our farmers.
It's a fantastic idea. I love that idea. Maybe we can get that in the farm bill. I don't know.
Wouldn't that be awesome? We need a farm bill so that we can keep that moving. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we could write up some
done.
language for that. That'd be great.
We know we're not. They say we're going to get one this year. I don't necessarily believe that, but we'll see. That would be great. What is a misconception about the co-ops that you wish more people understood?
One of the things in the co-op system that I think, well, first of all, I'm going to start with an obvious, and then I'm going to start a little more nuanced.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think most people know or understand that the cooperatives are totally and truly member owned. And I don't think most people, even farmer members of the cooperatives, always appreciate the fact that those dollars aren't leaving the system. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, if privates had a large swath of area across the state, the number of assets and the competitiveness in this space would decrease really, really, really quickly. Okay. Now, on the flip side, I think that there's a number of folks out there that can be critical of the cooperative system, and maybe somewhat rightfully so, that the cooperative system continues to do what it has done for a long, long time, and that's all that they're currently doing. And I do think maybe some of that, maybe there's some innovation that we need to be a little bit better with and quicker with. But at the same time, I would say back to those folks that they shouldn't forget about how competitive they keep this space, how competitive the cooperative system keeps this space. Really, truly is. Is your local co-op going to be the best price on absolutely everything you do? Maybe not. Is your local co-op the space that has the grain assets that are put in place that you're able to use? 100%. Are they the ones that are keeping fertilizer prices very competitive because of the assets that they put in place for these large amounts of bulk to be handled through the system? 100%. Are they integrated to the farm needs? I think 100%, right, in most spaces. So I think that those are kind of two sides to it. Sometimes the farmer members forget the benefit that they're receiving from the local co-op, and sometimes we can be critical of the cooperative system, but I think it's important that as we're critical, we also think about what's really happening there. Because there's both.
So you've talked about consolidation and some mergers and acquisitions that have happened in the past. And I think before you've talked about, and maybe you can just allude to this, the history of, how many we've started out with and then what we've gone to. Do you see any spaces where new cooperatives are coming up, whether it be organics or other small grains or anything like that? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when you think about the co-op system, first of all, once again, so about 40 grain and farm supply cooperatives in the state. And with the energy locations, with the agronomy locations, with their C-stores, and with the grain locations, they're still operating about 700 locations across the state of Iowa. So just think about that. In many counties, these co-ops are the number one property tax payer. Right?
Wow. Okay.
By far in some counties because of the assets that they have put in place. So even though we've seen a lot of consolidation, we have not seen a lot fewer locations. So if you would go back to the 19 to 1920, you could see 700 individual co-ops across the state. Now you're seeing 700 locations across the state, which is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
So we're not necessarily seeing fewer locations. Now, when you look at how is the cooperative space developing out, we don't have a lot of new cooperatives in the state that have been formed recently, but Well, that being said, there are examples. There's a dairy cooperative in Hall, Iowa that makes cheese. Right?
Oh, okay.
Very interesting business that's making cheese up in Hall in the northwest part of the state.
Okay.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool cooperative. And we have other cooperatives across the state. Siouxland Energy is in the space, and there's other in the space that have come in for various reasons. Most of the newer cooperatives that have formed have not been in the ag sector.
Okay.
I don't think that's necessarily bad. It's kind of a state of where the ag sector has been with the consolidation that we have been seeing. There's other areas where cooperatives are huge, right? So outside of the ag space, we can't forget about our RECs, right? And our telecoms and our credit unions, which have been incredibly successful in this state.
Right.
But also there's housing cooperatives that have popped up all over the place,
Yeah.
right? There's other food cooperatives and small grocery store cooperatives that have popped up all over the place. So there's other types of co-ops like that exist as well.
So what conditions have to exist for that? Is it just, is there, if we were to talk about, in the food space, like the cheese or anything, like what has to happen for those new co-ops to be successful?
So I'll give you an example of phone calls that I often get at the Iowa Institute for Cooperatives. I've gotten, just in the last year and a half, I've probably gotten 4 of these. And it's someone from a small town wanting to start a grocery cooperative, which makes sense. They might have lost their little store. The C-store doesn't quite cut it. They want something more than that, right?
Yeah.
And I say, that's great. And they'll say, well, we have investors lined up. And I said, that's awesome. Do you have a plan to be able to make money?
Yeah.
And they will say to me, no, we want to be a cooperative. And I say, well, let's think that through. So if you have investors that invest money and you're able to put your store together and you're able to have your Campbell soup on the shelf and your milk on the shelf, right, and your bread on the shelf or whatever it is you're going to sell on the shelf, that's great. But at the end of the year, if that cooperative loses money, what do you do with that loss? Well, that loss would be divided back to every one of the members, and at the end of the year, they would get a bill for the amount of money that was lost, right?
Yeah.
So normally, if a cooperative makes money, what do you get at the end of the year? Some kind of patronage, some kind of money back that goes back to the owner, or you invest in a bigger store, right? Or more assets or more inventory, right? All those kinds of things. So what you have to have are conditions where you can have individual owners that would want to come together and also patronize the place, along with the ability to be able to make some kind of money so this can stand on its own and increase in value over time.
Yeah.
And there's a common misconception that says cooperatives don't need to be profitable. The cooperatives in the state of Iowa that have not been profitable over a period of time are no longer here. They have been consolidated into someone else. So they do need to make money. Here's another example, though, of a cooperative that many people don't realize. Ace Hardware is a cooperative, right? I love going into Ace Hardware stores because many of them still smell like a hardware store, and I'll say that all the time, right? It smells like, I don't know, pipe fittings and all sorts of paint and wood and everything all in one place. Somehow that just creates its own. So, but it's not me when I go into the Ace Hardware that is the member of the cooperative,
right?
Like we would think. Rather, it's the store owners that are members of a buying cooperative, which is located north of Chicago, right? That is a buying cooperative called Ace Hardware, where they go out and they buy Stanley hammers and all the other products that are in those stores for the store owners who have a vote in the cooperative and can be on the board of directors of that cooperative, right? So I think there are many spaces that the co-ops can be in.
So, and I think people underestimate, speaking of the Ace Hardware, the grocery co-ops, the importance of co-ops within rural Iowa. Can you talk just a little bit about that? And I think the highlight for me when you were talking about the consolidations is that the number of co-ops may have gone, but the locations have gone up, which makes me hopeful for rural Iowa. But can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, when you think about this space and how it's developed out, in the 1880s, Iowa was primarily producing oats, right? That was our crop. And what was that used for? That was used to feed horses, and that was used. Quaker Oats,
Yeah.
you think about that as an Iowa company, right? So
Yeah.
So what that was the space that we were in, but railroads were very powerful in those days, and railroads would absorb all of the profits out of agriculture because you had no choice but to ship by rail. And the railroads actually owned the elevators along the tracks as well.
Oh, really?
So whenever there was money to be made, the railroads would absorb that money. So farmers said, no way, we can't keep this going. And you had antitrust regulations put in place in the 1880s to be able to say, railroads, you can't just absorb all of this money out of this. That was amazing to think the United States did that in those years.
Yeah.
Then farmers wanted to come together to be able to buy together and to be able to market their grain together and to be able to own their own elevators along the railroad tracks. But they were subject to that same antitrust regulation that they or their grandfathers helped get put in place. Right. So that's where we had the Capper-Volstead Act that actually allowed farmers to be able to organize in a co-op system to be able to even be in this space. So that allowed us, not only Iowa, but when you think about settling the West, if we didn't have the ability to be able to come together, to be able to buy together as farmers, and to be able to sell together as farmers, we wouldn't have developed this space out in nearly the same way that we did.
Yeah.
Right. And on top of that, then power came through. And how do you get the person in the most rural area of Iowa power so that they can be competitive with their neighbors or increase their lifestyles or not want to move out of that area so they can be in an area where they can get electricity, right? To milk the cows or to be able to heat your home ultimately and all those things.
Yeah.
It's our co-op system that allowed that to happen through the rural electric system.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating system to be able to think about what that did, to be able to think about the value of it, and to be able to think about the fact that we're not going to, the person at the end of that line, we're not going to gouge them on price to be able to get them electricity through this system.
Yes.
So I think that those are a couple of examples that when you think about how the space is developed out, really important. Now, when I think about how this space looks over the next 30 years, I think that co-ops are also critically important in that space because, we've came through a period of time where China has been a big demand point for agriculture with soybeans.
Yes.
Absolutely huge. Their population has peaked and is falling. We also came through a period of time where ethanol has been a massive game changer when you think about demand for corn.
Yes.
Right? We still want to have as much domestic consumption through ethanol and renewable fuels as we possibly can. It's very good for agriculture. Mm-hmm. That being said, it's hard to picture that area continuing to develop as fast as it's done over the last 20 years.
Right.
So hopefully we can get marginal gains there, but it's hard to picture it. What do we need? Our cooperatives need to be the ones that are connecting us to the globe now. 96% of the consumers in the world live outside of the United States.
Wow.
But we have about 4% of the global population in the United States, right? It's an amazing number to think about.
Yeah.
Now, consumers outside of the United States don't consume as much as people in the U.S. do. But that is a massive market that we need to be part of, and I think our cooperative system is really well poised in the future to make sure that we are part of that space.
It's fascinating.
Yep.
Okay, so on this podcast, we talk a lot about people who challenge existing systems in constructive ways. I think you just showed how farmers have done that, and that's why co-ops exist. Who are the happy disruptors in the cooperative movement today that are doing things differently? And if I get it's like picking your favorite child. So if you don't want to name names, you can just talk concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things happening in the cooperative system right now is this thought process of how do we further integrate into the supply chains around us. So I talked a little bit about this farm gate space is not all that consolidated. Even the largest cooperatives are not that large. The largest farmers, they're maybe big compared to their neighbors, but they're not that large when you think about the supply chains around them, right? Fertilizer space and on through the food processing space. I think that the ones that are out there right now are really looking to be able to disrupt and challenge the supply chains around them in some way. Exactly how this is going to play out, I don't know. But they will look to try to gain margin, make more money in the supply chains around them and in the space around them. And as that happens, maybe the space will start changing some. And I'll give you a quick example. Okay. A quick example of this is when I was a kid, we had a Dan's Jack and Jill and a Jill's Piggly Wiggly, right? You know, in our little town that I grew up in. And where did they get their groceries from? Super Value, right? Super Value was a distributor of groceries that existed up in the Twin Cities. And they would distribute to grocery retailers all around. Well, a grocery chain in the southeast part of the United States called Kroger started getting really big.
Right.
And as Kroger got really big, what were they able to do? They were able to go directly to Campbell's. I use Campbell's as an example, but you can use General Mills or whomever, right?
Yeah.
And they were able to go directly there. So they were able to change those supply chains and become much more direct. Now, was that awesome for Jill's Piggly Wiggly? Not really.
Right.
But that was a disruption that happened, and it's changed the face of how we buy groceries. Now, is it great for the little town? Maybe, maybe not. Did it bring lower prices through the system? Almost certainly.
Yeah.
So that's a supply chain disruption. I think that this farm gate space is uniquely poised to be able to see some supply chain disruptive kinds of activities in the next decade.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's going to be very fascinating to see how that plays out, because those are large, pretty powerful competitors around them.
Yes.
So they do that through partnerships. I'm not saying they're only going to disrupt it by going in and beating them some, but they do it through different types of partnerships. Do they do it through merchandising opportunities? Do they think about buying different, like Jill's Piggly Wiggly would have had to do when they weren't using Super Value as much? You know, what does that space look like? I think it becomes very fascinating to see how that plays out.
So one of the things that we've heard a lot through the governor's discussion and just through social media in general in the younger generation, and I know you talked about being competitive in the global market, and we just had this discussion at our dinner table last night. Do you see a world where we start producing more that we consume internally within the state or within the country? And does that start to help with some of that disruption as well? Right.
So, Hannah, I think that that's a question that, in my mind, being an economist, right?
Yeah.
So I get claimed to be that. I think about the demand stack for U.S. agriculture.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you think about that demand stack, part of that is domestic consumption in all forms. So that could be, how do we take corn and turn it into proteins through the system, right? And how do livestock fit into this demand stack? And how does renewable fuels fit into this demand stack? And I think we need to do as much as we possibly can to grow our demand stack of domestic consumption, which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think that is really, really important for the space.
Yeah.
But let's go back a minute ago. We just said about 96 or nearly 96% of the consumers in the world, our customers, don't live in the U.S.
Right.
So yes, do we need to grow our demand stack in the U.S.? 100%. Can we afford to not think about trade when we think about U.S. agriculture? I don't believe that we can. Even if China is not growing as fast, half the population of the world lives between China and through the Pacific, Asia rim and into India.
Yeah.
It's a massive space that we can't forget about. And they don't have our types of soil. They don't have our endowments of natural resources.
Yeah.
The Black Sea area of Russia, Ukraine, they do, right? Parts of Brazil and Argentina do. We're sitting in the middle of one of 3 areas in the world that have those natural endowments that are unbelievable. I think we cannot forget about trade in the U.S. In fact, last week I was out in Washington, D.C. talking on the Hill about trade with members of Congress.
Yeah, it's a fascinating push-pull that exists, and I think we'll have some really interesting conversations within society. But yeah, it's one of those things that we'll see what happens. It's going to be exciting to watch.
Yes, it will.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. This is fascinating. Please like and subscribe and share this everywhere. And we appreciate you coming on today.
Well, I appreciate what you are doing, Hannah, what the Great Outdoors Foundation is doing. It's a wonderful space. So I'm glad to be able to be part of what you're doing and to be able to partner with you in ways that we can.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you.